Hey listeners, it's Natalie. It is so nice to be back to the podcast for a new season. For my first episode, I have a sweet, tart, and charming treat for you today. Bernice Ingvaldson runs HoneyBerryUSA with her husband Jim out of their farm in northern Minnesota. So this all came about because last year, a friend and podcast listener, shout out to Michelle, suggested I contact a USDA researcher she knew who had done some work with honeyberries, which are also known as haskaps. The researcher sent me to Bernice, who has established herself as one of the experts in growing haskaps in the States. I think perennial fruits are one of the most delightful things in the world. And it's super exciting to me that there are more out there than what most consumers or even farmers know about. I'm appreciative of people like Bernice who have worked to develop systems that can make these crops profitable, not just for the home gardeners, and to the breeders who have developed these new varieties. You can check out her website where they have a lot of practical information on growing haskaps, honeyberries, happy berries. They have videos, different iterations of their harvesting equipment. It's just full of good stuff. And also you can order your haskaps. Enjoy our conversation.
Today's episode is brought to you by Rimol Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimol Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimolgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimol tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. Today's episode is also brought to you by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are designed and built in Italy, where small-scale farming has been a way of life for generations. Discover the beauty of BCS on your farm with PTO-driven implements for soil working, shredding cover crops, spreading compost, mowing under fences, clearing snow, and much more, all powered by a single gear-driven machine that's tailored to the size and scale of your operation. We have been using a BCS tractor on our farm since 2014, and it has saved the day and leveled the workload more times than I can count. And I find new ways to employ it every single season. To learn more, view sale pricing, or locate your nearest dealer, visit bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com. To learn more, view sale pricing, or locate your nearest dealer, visit bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com. All right, enjoy the show.
Welcome. Thank you for doing this. I always like to start with, who are you and how did you get to where you are and what you're doing? And I was studying your website and you have a really charming origin story. So if you could just sort of introduce yourself and how you ended up being the honeyberry or haskap expert in this country.
Oh, well, thank you. I just say that I just put my brain on the web as I started learning about everything. I thought I'd share what I was learning. And so it's quite an eclectic mixture of links and notes and anecdotes of personal experience as we did start to grow the haskap honeyberries. And it's just been a real fun to be able to share what we've been learning along the way. I still remember the learning curve was really steep, and it's still a process of still learning how to grow and use this great berry. But my name is Bernice Ingvaldson. I'm married to Jim Ingvaldson. We live in northern Minnesota, just 25 miles north of the headwaters of the Mississippi River. That's kind of our claim to fame. And we're about halfway in between Winnipeg and Minneapolis. And let's see what else. I'm from Canada. Jim was born in Minnesota here. And we met in Arizona. So we ended up back in his hometown. And in 2010, things were kind of slowing down with the construction business. We had built a few homes and sold. And then when things were slowing down in 2008, we kind of looking for maybe something to get out of the building. And well, what happened was I was looking through the garden catalogs that came in the middle of winter, well, early in the winter, I think it was January of 2010, and I noticed this new strange looking blue colored berry I'd never heard before. And the catalog listed it as a honeyberry. And they called it a honeyberry because it was a honeysuckle berry, a blue edible blue honeysuckle berry that actually looked pretty good in the middle of winter where everything's white and gray and cold, and see this bright blue berry in the catalog. I thought, oh, that looks pretty good. So sent off for a couple of these bare root plants that would be shipped to me in the spring. And sure enough, I think later in probably May, I probably got these 2 dead looking sticks, which I'd never received bare root plants before. And well, I was skeptical, but I put them in the ground, and well, one of them actually didn't break dormancy, but the other one did, and burst out with, fresh growth of green leaves. And I was happy about that. But that was my very first exposure to the honeyberry.
And you, at that time, you were a gardener. You didn't necessarily have plans to become a farmer.
Well, I married a farmer. He had been a dairy farmer, and then he had sold out, and we started kind of fresh when we got married 2003. And like, as I mentioned, did some construction and building and renovations. And then, along the way, so we had 2.5 acres. We, with the help of friends, we built a little log cabin where we still live to this day, 16 by 24 story and 3/4 little cabin nestled into, it was a pasture. We had to fence out the cows, and so we're kind of surrounded by woods and pasture, and it's really pretty here. So we had an 1.5 acres of empty land that we didn't know what to do with. So we're wondering what to do with this pasture land that could be tilled. I was married to a farmer, so we considered different options, but nothing really clicked. So we just started, with a garden. I call it a postage stamp size garden when we started out, and it just gradually grew every year. And so that's why in 2010 I was looking in the garden magazine for things to plant the coming year. And we had no idea how things would, the turn of events just by taking that step of ordering those 2 first initial bare root plants.
Yeah.
Well,
luckily the one survived, right? Imagine if they had both died.
I might have gotten too discouraged, but I guess the second part of the story is I returned to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan that summer to visit family, and I Googled cold hardy fruit because, being as if I was going to get into planting more edibles, not just vegetables, but planting some fruit, I wanted to see what was out there. I was familiar, of course, the raspberries and strawberries, and being from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, of course, I was very familiar with Saskatoon berries, which are called service berries here south of the border, or June berries in Minnesota. And but I was just, out there exploring, what else is out there that I might not have heard of. And this haskap berry popped up. And the more I read about it, I realized, okay, so this must be the same thing, the thing that I had ordered that spring. And the University of Saskatchewan was doing some breeding and research with this haskap berry. They call it haskap after the Japanese name, haskapu. And then that really kind of intrigued me. So next day when I went out to visit a friend in the country, we got talking gardening, and asked her if she'd heard of these haskap berries. And she said, yeah, her mother-in-law had gotten some at an auction a few years ago. The Canadians are much ahead of us, by that time even already. And so we walked to the adjacent farmyard, and I got my first glimpse and taste even of Haskap honeyberry. It was one of the smaller berries, varieties that has a smaller berry, but it was big enough for me to pop in my mouth and experience that sensation of that tartness with a bit of sweetness, and the skin was so thin it just kind of melted in my mouth, and I didn't notice any seeds, and it was quite intriguing. And I asked my friend, well, what do you do with them? And she said, nothing. My son eats them all off the bush. So,
Yeah.
so I figured if it was a hit with kids, it was something, definitely worth pursuing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that. And so what does your farm currently look like? What do you grow and how do you sell it?
Well, I came back just to follow up. I came back and told my husband about, being actually having had tasted Haskap honeyberry. And I said, yeah, I'd like maybe, get maybe a couple hundred and start a little U-pick. I thought that'd be a nice little side thing for me, hobby to do. And he shot back at me, well, how are you going to pay for them? And I immediately answered him. I don't know where I got this answer from, but I guess I just said, well, I'll sell some. I knew that the more that you buy from wholesale nurseries, the cheaper they are. I guess I must have looked into them a little bit already. And so that first year we brought some down, and I had 120 left after selling them, and they were paid for. So I was happy. That was good. So I didn't have time. I wasn't prepared. I just healed them into our garden area because we didn't have the rows set up. There's just nothing was prepared. So the nice thing about these bushes is they're pretty vigorous, and they can take a beating if you give them half a chance. So I got them in the ground. They didn't dry out or anything, but once you get them in the ground, then they're good for the winter because they're cold hardy. So figured I'd deal with them in the spring. Well, a month later, Jim says to me, I think you should bring down some more plants to sell in the spring. So, then I had to get busy. I get serious and learn about how to start a nursery and import business and all that, because we were going to bring down these newer varieties from the University of Saskatchewan program. So that's how we got started. And then as we learned that there are more things that we could grow besides honeyberries, like the tart cherries from the University of Saskatchewan breeding program. Okay, well, let's bring down some cherries. So that's how we started, with 3 kinds of honeyberries and 2 varieties of cherries. And then we just started learning, well, there's more things we could grow. There's currants. Well, with currants, there's black currants, red currants, white currants, and pink currants. So it just, as we learned and kept adding to our lineup of plants that we would sell, we would start, adding them to our own orchard. And we ended up with, we have about between 3 and 4 acres of U-pick now of all these various berries.
And it is mostly U-pick. It's not, you're not selling them as much pre-picked.
Well, we would love for people to come and pick them all, but whatever is not picked, we do harvest, and we call it juice quality berries. We clean them. There might be a few twigs or leaves in them, which leaves are edible. There's no problem there, but you don't want, you want a twig, I guess, if you're not expecting it. So we do sell wholesale 4 to 5 gallon buckets to jam makers and also some beverage producers. We've done that over the years to varying degrees. So, and fresh as well. We do some fresh. We've supplied some local stores. They're pretty soft, so they don't ship very well. We don't focus on supplying a lot of, fresh product for grocery stores, but our local co-op and some of the local stores, as time and labor permits, we do that. So the season is short.
Yeah, you mentioned jam and drinks, and it's funny because my first introduction to Haskap was a trip to Nova Scotia. I think it was probably about 10 years ago, and I had never heard of Haskap, and we got some jam and we got some gin, actually, some Haskap gin, and they're both quite nice, and I've been thinking about Haskap ever since then. And yeah, it's interesting because it definitely seems like everyone in Canada knows about them. Like you go to the grocery store and they've got frozen Haskap in the freezer section next to the blueberries. But they're still pretty unknown or novel in the States. So I'm curious if you could speak to sort of the status of them in Canada and what you're finding when you're selling the plants in the States. Is it mostly home gardeners or commercial growers?
Yeah, well, definitely the Canadians are ahead of us. They've been growing them commercially now at a much larger scale than we have here in the States. So as far as finding them in the stores frozen, there are some growers and processors that are able to harvest and clean and freeze and clean them and package them. It's quite a process, you can imagine, to get the berries, from the field into the packaged form, and especially when the berries are soft, it's a real challenge to do that. But it is possible, but you have to have all the equipment, to be able to freeze them and then package them. So we've stayed away from that as far as retail frozen berries. But yes, there are several farms that do that across Canada. And I think in the maritime provinces, it's, the smaller provinces with the tourist trade, there would be more visibility, I think, with them. But in the rest of Canada, they aren't yet in every store.
Okay,
shelf,
gotcha. Yeah, I only really have experience in Quebec and Nova Scotia, so that makes sense.
Yeah. So definitely in some areas, they are very well known. Especially if it's part of the local industry. And but I'll speak about in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where the breeding took place. There are some specialty ice cream shops that carry Haskap ice cream and farmers markets, and so there's definitely greater visibility and recognition across Canada than in the States. And we're kind of, I'll speak as a Canadian. I have dual citizenship, but as a Canadian, we're quite proud of, when we are able to do something and be innovators of something, especially when it's as good as this product. And as in the States, though, yes, so there are farmers that have planted 40, 80, 120 acres of these things. They have gone into it, jumped in feet first, to much larger scale. I guess you can call them the crazy Canucks. And I think part of it is there's such a limitation what you can grow in zone 2 and 3 across Canada. So when there is something new and it's so good, it's very exciting. Whereas, get down to the States and you get this last weekend, I had to taste a pawpaw for the first time. Well, that's just not going to grow in zone 2 yet, at least. And, there's much more, there are many more options the further south you grow with specialty fruits. So here in zone 3, when we're just 2 hours south of the Canadian border, we have that same sense of excitement that, hey, there's something new to us that I can grow and promote. So that's where we're at. But I just would say there are some more larger commercial growers in the States. They haven't, as far as I know, they haven't really jumped in with 100 acres. There could be, but I'm not aware of them. But as far as home growers go, I think it's very well known now, I would say, um, as far as home growers that are, keeping up with what's new, and they're available, in various garden catalogs, and so the home grower is much more aware of what a honeyberry is now than the average grocery store shopper.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you can grow these in zone 2-3, which is amazing. And that kind of leads me to a question about the genetics and the breeding efforts. So, and also that ties into this question of the name, sort of Haskap, honeyberry. Where do these things come from, and where can you grow them?
Yeah, well, they grow circumpolar. That means around the globe in the northern hemisphere. So there have been sightings I've heard here in Minnesota at a state park, Big Bog State Park. A naturalist told me, and Dr. Bob Bors took a sabbatical and went across Canada and identified various sites and mapped out some sites and took samples actually of the honeyberry, Haskap, Lindisera cerulean, Lotus cerulean, and he has a planting there at the University of Saskatchewan. So there are culture, plants that are native to North America, but the University of Saskatchewan breeding program has focused largely on combining Japanese and Russian genetics to get larger berries with a great flavor. Every honeyberry needs most of them need two parents for pollination. Just like an apple, you need to plant two apple trees, and it's not that they're male or female; they both produce fruit, but just for the good pollination, you need at least two plants, and so every child is is unique, just like humans. Every child is unique. So once they find a new child plant that has the characteristics that they're looking for, then they will propagate that and eventually release the best ones for sale to the public.
And so, are there varieties that do well in more in warmer regions?
Certainly, the germplasm, the genetics from Japan, which has a more temperate climate, are more suited to zones, 6, 7, 8. Even then, it's a little bit, shall we say, experimental. I always warn people that, yeah, you're welcome to try it, but these are northern plants, and you give them some shade and adequate water in more southern climates, they can survive and produce, but they are exceptional through in the northern climates. But yeah,
do they need freezing to break dormants, to go dormant and break dormancy?
I don't have specific information at the tip of my head that as far as the number of cold hours or whether they need freezing. I'm sorry, I am a little fuzzy
that's
on.
Okay.
But as far as exact data, but I will say it with the later blooming Japanese varieties. And when I say later blooming, it's just the early bloomers are the ones like from Siberia, where you have a cold winter, and then when it warms up in the spring, it warms up fast, but you have a shorter growing season. So as soon as you get a warmer spell, the early blooming varieties will break out. They think, oh yeah, it's spring. It's time to wake up, get going. So you don't want to grow those in the south because if you have a warm up time in January, you want to keep them just dormant, for a couple more months. So that's why the Japanese is more used to the more temperate climate, and they will delay in waking up. So, but actually in our zone, like zones 3 and 4, the difference between early and late blooming varieties, it can be as little as a week difference or as much as a month difference as far as when they wake up. It just really depends on the weather pattern, but that's just a rule of thumb. The early blooming Russian varieties is better for the northern climates and Japanese for the more temperate zones.
And in your climate, when are you typically harvesting these berries?
We start usually around Father's Day for the northern Russian varieties, and then around the 4th of July for the Japanese varieties, or a little bit later. So there can be a harvest window, let's see, of a couple weeks for these berries. Now, the longer that you let them ripen on the bush, the sweeter they get. So most of us like a sweeter berry, and yet at the same time, if it's like the first ripe berry in the spring, I find that I'm out there eating them before they're fully ripe, just because they are, ripe enough, and it's the first fresh fruit of the spring of the season, and it's kind of like, if you like that sour tartness, we can eat them before they're even fully ripe. But
yeah, that's such a treat to be able to have something so early in the season up north.
yeah.
And that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, it was really funny. It's fun to talk to people with, different experiences. And the other day I was discussing the introduction of new crops with my friend, and she said, like, why do we even need new crops? Like, what's the point? And so I loved that question, because it forced me to articulate why that's important. And so I'm wondering if you could talk to, like, that question, maybe not that we need new crops, but why might we want some new crops? What value do they bring to our farming systems and to human health?
Well, in terms of an earlier crop and a crop that we can grow prior to a pest such as the spotted winged Drosophila, which has a tendency to decimate some of the later crops, it can be a real need. This year, we were able to harvest honeyberries before the spotted wing came, well, half of our crop, but then this new Asian pest that lays its eggs and damages fruit before the fruit is fully ripe, it came, and it really hit our cherries hard. We only had a couple days when we could harvest the cherries. We don't spray, and we just haven't gotten into, even organic sprays. We just try and pick as quick and fast as we can. So having a fruit that is right before a pest, or another thing, it's for those people that go to farmers market, having a fruit that's, first available early in the season. Let's see what other reasons. But it's not just a matter of earliness. As I mentioned, we grow the later varieties as well. They grow fine in zone 3. So by growing early and late varieties, we can extend the season, usually for a month. But this year, that pest did take out some of our later blooming ones. So, and let's see. As far as commercially, being able to offer a longer season, either for your customers or even for yourself. Weather is another factor. Sometimes we can get a heavy storm, and if you have a new variety that maybe ripens at a different time than your other fruit, it will escape the damage that storm does.
Yeah, so just diversifying and spreading the risk. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And
what about? Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think we're on the same wavelength there. Yep. And the health benefits. it's a berry that tastes good, and it's so good for you. It is so rich in antioxidants, anthocyanins, and studies have shown that there's indications of benefit for blood pressure, and some a European journal also reported a study that was done on episodic memory. So, it just might give a little bit of an edge for people with, those conditions. So, yeah, lots of good reasons to grow a new fruit.
And it brings joy. Like, I think I love that story of your friends' kids just going out and eating all of them. And I think kids have such a, differentiating palate. Like, sometimes my daughter, she'll even say, like, I don't like these store-bought carrots. I only want fresh carrots, and it's so rewarding to eat that fresh, delicious fruit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, one incident pops into my memory from this last summer you picked. A grandmother brought her preschool granddaughter out, and she was just as happy as could be out there. And then when it came time to leave, well, that was a struggle, because she was so happy in the berry patch, and she just did not want to leave. Now it turns out that she was on the spectrum, and had some special needs. But for that time out in the berry patch, it was just grandma and granddaughter just enjoying being out in nature and being free.
Yeah, I love that. Making memories. So you said with your first bushes, you just kind of healed them in, and you didn't have anything set up. And so over the years, what have you learned about the important aspects of setting up a successful orchard in terms of both the setup, but then also the maintenance?
Oh, yeah. Well, I can really speak to whether you're a home grower or a commercial operator, and that is number one, weed control. These bushes have very shallow, fibrous roots, and if you plant them in the middle of a patch of quackgrass, we can dig a little hole and stick them in, and they might survive, but there's just too much competition. So get a good 3-foot or more diameter. Clear away any of that grass or competition from weeds, and then either mulch or put. We ended up going with heavy duty landscape fabric, and that's lasted like 10 years already. So anything cardboard that you can put down to keep that grass away, at least for the first 3-4 years. After the plants get established, they can hold their own better, but weed control is crucial.
Do you put drip irrigation, or do you just rely on rain?
Well, it depends on the year. We did install drip irrigation for our seedlings, for the first few years, just to give them a more consistent and a backup in case of a drought. And yeah, we have used it. So, and same goes for their home growers. So, water is needed. Once they get established, in 2021, we had a 100-year drought, and our plants that were 10-year-old plants, it didn't seem to phase them because they produce early in the season. The snow melt, even if there's not much snow, there's just enough moisture that we've never had a failure due to drought. But after, like I said, after several years of getting well established, and now we've had another year of drought, and in the latter part of the year, we do have a sandy loam with heavy clay underneath, so that is another factor. I've had customers, plant into very sandy soils, and they would not tolerate a drought as well as the plants at our farm.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud sponsor of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. Since 1973, Johnny's has supported farmers and gardeners with superior seeds, tools, and information to help ensure their growing success and help feed their communities and families. The research farm is at the heart of Johnny's, where they trial thousands of varieties and tools every year. Their breeding program uniquely focuses on introducing varieties that meet the needs or solve the challenges mixed market, small farmers, and avid gardeners face. Visit johnnyseeds.com for innovative new varieties and time-tested favorites to grow this season. You can also browse their online growers library, link in the description, for a wealth of free educational resources. The employee owners at Johnny's look forward to growing with you. Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to grow food, not spend my time creating pack lists, writing newsletters, responding to emails, or maintaining web stores. If I could spend less time on my phone and computer and more time farming, that would be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for CSA farmers. It takes care of the admin, managing orders, customer communications, and automating tedious tasks so you can get back to doing what you love. On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers 6 hours a week. That's 6 hours you could spend with your family, out in the field, or simply taking a breather. So, what would you do with an extra 6 hours? Now's the time to get your systems ready for next season. Learn how Farmhand can help at farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show.
So we were talking about kind of the requirements for maintenance. So you said you use weed mat. Do you use that in the aisles too, or do you have grass aisles, and how far apart are your rows?
Yeah, well, the bushes, we generally say for a home grower, 5 feet. Now, if you plant them 5 feet in row, most bushes will get to be 5+ feet. And some bushes can get even larger, like after 10 years, we've had some varieties that will grow 10 feet wide. Now, we did 5 foot in row and 10 feet between the row spacing initially in our first plot, which turned out to be, it got quite crowded. So, but after 10 years, we ended up just mowing the bushes to the ground and starting over. So there's room to walk through now. They grow after they get older, and we mow them to the ground. They grow 2 to 3 feet the next year because of that healthy root mass underneath. So the first year after a drastic pruning like that, they won't produce because the berries are produced on a year-old wood. So they will be produced the next year. Or you can, if you just have a bush or two, you can do rejuvenation pruning throughout their lifetime after about 5, 6, 7 years, depending on how vigorous the bush is. You can take out the older wood and just keep renewing it that way and keep it down to size. But if you have more room, better for commercial operations, look at what kind of equipment you want to run. We do let the grass grow in between the aisles. So, and my husband has a nice wide mower, 0-turn mower to zip up and down the aisles. And some farmers, would actually plant, 15, 20 feet apart so that they could put up hay in between the aisles. It just depends how much land you have and what approach you want to take.
What about fertility?
Yeah, well, I like to say if I can grow these, anyone can. We have done very little as far as fertilization. If you're a home grower, I'd recommend just putting out your kitchen scraps and compost, top dressing it. And there are, people that do foliar sprays and other fertilizations. Now, because the roots are shallow and fibrous, you don't want to overdo topical applications because it can burn the roots. So caution on fertilization, but yeah. common sense approach. That's kind of what I advise people.
And you mentioned that one of the advantages is that these are ripe before spotted wing Drosophila can destroy them. And it was interesting because I just had another interview with someone and we talked about spotted wing Drosophila. But are there other pests that are an issue for the honeyberries?
Yes. Well, I'll specify that the Russian varieties, the early bloomers, ripened early enough before spotted wing this year. We had an early invasion of spotted wing, and it did take out the later blooming and later ripening ones. So, but other years we've not had as much pressure, even with the later ones. So, and I also would mention that I gave the dates, between end of June, early July, and that is up here. The June bearing strawberries would ripen usually the first week in July. So that's where we get, with the early ripening varieties, we get like maybe a week before strawberries. But on the other hand, it's nice to have varieties that ripen concurrently with the strawberry season, because that's just when people are in berry picking mode, and they would be even more ripe at that time as well. So, but that's just, if you're in a more southern zone, just find out when your June bearing strawberries would ripen, and then that's approximately the time that your honeyberries would ripen. The early varieties the week before, and the later ones concurrent or a week after. And I'm sorry, back to your original question. We haven't really had too much. We've had, the forest tent caterpillars can get into the leaves up in Alaska. I hear there's something called a leaf roller that can bother the leaves.
What about, I'm thinking specifically of the avian sort.
Oh, the thieves and robbers. Yeah, that is probably our biggest challenge, because the cedar waxwings like to hold their annual conferences in our area, starting before they get really ripe. And so we have to get those nets up just, when pollination, bees can get through the nets anyways, but we like to just get the nets up. We have overhead netting on half of our U-pick, which is very nice, because once you get those nets up and it's overhead, so we don't have bushes growing through the nets. We walk underneath the nets. It's like a little canopy, and we get those up and seal them out. And we've used a bird call that has predator birds, and that'll scare away the robins and a lot of the birds. But the cedar waxwings are like kamikaze divers. They'll just dart in and out, and it deters them a little bit, but it really doesn't do a terribly effective job of keeping away the cedar waxwings. So we've tried many different things, and but netting really is so far, that seems to be the thing. Some people and it's like I said, it's a cedar waxwings. Once the wild service berries, Juneberry, Saskatoons ripen, they tend to not give us as much of as much pressure. Usually they've devoured quite a bit by then. But if there's more, because of they come for the early ones. And the other interesting thing is they like the smaller berries too. They'll pick on those, and the June berries are a smaller berry too. So I think they kind of like to go those. And the larger the berry, they can't fit the whole berry in their beak with the larger varieties. And so they'll just peck on and destroy half the berry because they can't get the whole berry down into their beak. So yeah, that's where we're at with the birds.
Yeah, I've had strawberry crops decimated by cedar waxwings as well, and they just peck at them and destroy them. I was on a an email listserv once, and someone emailed and said, "Can someone tell me what's happening with these birds? They look like they're dead." And someone else said, "Oh, those are cedar waxwings, and they're drunk, and they'll wake up and they'll be okay." And indeed they were. They had just indulged in too much overly ripe fruit. So there is one. I was preparing for this interview, and I was trying to read up on your website, which is very helpful and informative. And you had on your FAQs, you had a question: Is honeyberry invasive? And I was like, uh-oh. And so I started reading about that because, of course, I want to be really conscientious about not introducing crops that pose a risk to our landscapes. And out here, out east, certainly there is invasive honeysuckle that is a problem. It kills the trees and it's just very aggressive. But can you speak to sort of what you've observed about the potential invasiveness of honeyberries, which are, a different kind of honeysuckle? They are not the one that we know is invasive.
Right. Yeah. No, good. Very good question. But yeah, and I can speak from my 15 years of experience growing them. And we have a couple thousand plants, over a couple acres at 2 different sites. And I've found 2 or 3 wild plants that have survived. And this was just the last couple of years. And somehow some seeds, and I think, some of our avian friends probably transferred them and planted them, deposited them in our garden, where there was a little patch of black dirt, and I happened not to pull them out. I guess I recognized them fairly early as not a weed and decided to let them grow because I thought, oh, well, who knows? Maybe this will be the next greatest honeyberry, but I have to wait for a couple of years until it produces to get a taste and see if it's a decent berry worth keeping or not. And that is the extent of the invasiveness in 15 years, because just as I mentioned, they don't do well with competition. And we are surrounded by pasture. My husband puts up hay, so it's a very dense environment for a seed to drop into a hay field or a pasture and compete with that grass. And in the woods, they really aren't. They grow on the edge, more on the edge of the woods, and closer to more of a water source. So yeah, the woods is really not a conducive environment for them as either.
Yeah, and that's what I was reading had been the observations in Canada as well. It seems like in Canada, it hasn't been an issue, and they've been growing these, large scale commercially for 15, 20 years. So I don't want to dismiss it as a concern. I certainly want to acknowledge it, but it seems like it is not the next big invasive by any means. I did want to talk a little bit about the economics, if there's anything that you want to say about the economics of your operation and sort of scale. Like, is this something that works for folks who have a more diversified farm and just want to have kind of a small patch, or you're making a living off of your small acreage, but just whatever you might want to say about the economics?
Sure. Well, we are diversified. Like, our U-pick is one aspect of that. My husband also puts up hay. We have the mail order nursery, which actually is our main source of our main livelihood is selling the plants. So we try and keep on top of the latest varieties and provide that accessibility to what's coming out of the Canadian breeding programs, as well as the plants that Dr. Maxine Thompson out of Oregon, she's passed away now, but her breed program, we include hers, and then the breeding program from Lydia De La Field out of Arkansas. So there's three main sources of genetics that we are offering, and just keeping on top of that, because it's always, and just providing as much, from the ground, real life experience from our own demo plot. We have over 70, where our part in this whole world is being diversified and trying to just promote, educate, carry on Dr. Bob Bohr's vision of educating people so that they know how to grow them. Let me just put a plug in for back to education. They didn't really take off till Dr. Bob started really educating people that once they turn blue, don't get them right away, because they need 2 to 3 weeks to really ripe, get palatable and sweet. So they've been around for 30 years, but it's just the last 15, 20 years when Dr. Bob really started giving seminars, and the propagators started educating people as well. But back to the economics. I tend to ramble here.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So we price our UPIC like the raspberry crop. We're doing $5 a pound. Closer to larger centers in other parts of the country, they're doing $7 a pound of UPIC, and that's about 3 cups of berries per pound. So, and the more that people buy, it's not just coming out to buy fruit. It's an experience when people come to pick. It's making memories. It's creating traditions. It's getting the fresh air, enjoying being outside. So it's more than just going to the store and grabbing some berries. But so we value our work and what we do, the commercial and the experience that we provide. Then the commercial growers, like the Canadians, they would their prices drop significantly, when they do wholesale orders. So you have to look at where you are in that range. If you want to grow it commercially, is it going to be probably for the small grower, really the having a UPIC, or having a local small business that you can provide and funnel your product to at a good enough profit, but at the same time being aware that as a commodity, that there's really no competition with the larger growers that can have a much lower price point.
Do you have any closing thoughts on Haskap Honeyberry? Anything I've missed?
Being as this is an audio call, I can't show any pictures, but let me just try and convey the smiles and the, it's a berry that tastes so good and it's good for you. I guess that's what I want to leave with. 99% of the people that come just really, really like the product and like the taste. And it's when people taste a good berry for the first time, that's, not too tart, that's nice and ripe and it's good variety, their eyes will light up, and then slowly it's like this, I call it a mystery berry. It's like a combination of all my favorite berries, a raspberry, a strawberry, a blueberry, and blackberry. It's more like most like a blackberry taste. So it's kind of tart but sweet, but it's just, and I think because it's such a healthy berry too, it just kind of has a systemic effect. It's a happy berry. Makes me happy.
I love that. The Haskap Happy Berry.
Yep. I hope many of your listeners can can have an opportunity to try one soon.
Yeah, and I'm happy to put anything in the show notes. I will definitely put HoneyberryUSA and anything else you would suggest as links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Bernice. It's been a treat to talk to you. Thanks, as always, for listening, and thanks to Bernice for sitting down with me and chatting about the happy Hascab honeyberries. I so wish I had some in my freezer right now that I could dip into. Oh, blue, oblong goodness. Till next time.
All right, we hope you enjoyed that episode. Always make sure to check the links in the show notes for how to follow our guests and hosts. The No-Till Market Garden podcast is a free show that is supported by folks like you who contribute every month over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. That support helps ensure all the shows we do, from the Seed Farmer podcast to the Winter Growers podcast, the Collaborative Farming podcast, the Composter podcast, Growers Daily, and of course, the No-Till Market Garden podcast, can continue to go and grow. You can also find books and hats as well as an active forum over at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge thank you to editor Michael Sellis and producer Jackson Roulette for all their work on this show and the rest of the team over at no-tillgrowers.com. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and make sure you are subscribed wherever you're hearing this so you don't miss the next episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. See you then.